I'm Matthew J.R. Nielsen. I'm the creator of The Big Soup, Growing Up Autistic, and this is the True North Country Comics podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics podcast, dedicated to celebrate Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. On this episode, I chat with Matthew J.R. Nielsen about his graphic memoir, The Big Soup, Growing Up Autistic, from Cloudscape Comics, available on Kickstarter. Please like and subscribe to this website by hitting the subscribe button so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. Based in Vancouver, British Columbia, Matthew J.R. Nielsen is a comic book creator who enjoys storytelling, world building, and more, all leading to the idea of portraying people, places, and emotions through art. Previously, Matthew has produced a 50-page comic, a 20-page full-color webcomic, spot illustrations, cover art, and tattoo designs. Matthew illustrated 8-year anniversary for Monstercat, wrote a story for the Cloudscape Anthology Life Finds, illustrated the cold and actual sky for Imperiad Entertainment, and more. His latest project is the graphic memoir, The Big Soup, Growing Up Autistic, from Cloudscape Comics. The Big Soup, Growing Up Autistic is an autistic graphic memoir about compassion as well as an educational testimony about understanding those who are different. In general, growing up is tough, but it's much tougher when you feel like everyone else has given the rule book to life except you. This is the life of Matthew J.R. Nielsen, one of the many autistic experiences out there. From early challenges of his parents trying to get him diagnosed and trying to find a school with the right support, to later challenges such as jobs and independent living, this book tells the story of Matthew's journey, controlling anger, gaining empathy, learning compassion and respect. These are the many lessons relayed in The Big Soup. So, without further ado, here's my chat with Matthew J.R. Nielsen about his graphic memoir, The Big Soup, Growing Up Autistic, from Cloudscape Comics, available on Kickstarter. So, Matthew J.R. Nielsen, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Yeah, no worries.
I appreciate your time. Before we get going with all the questions, I would like to know, what was the first comic book that you read?
I think it would be the old Beanos and Dandies in the UK. My mum used to get me those as magazines. Like from the shops every week, we'd get a couple of those. We get one each. And then eventually I moved on to Asterix and Obelix, but it took a while. I could keep going if you want to hear a long story. But
Well, those are classics for sure growing up, but I'm wondering, who or what inspires you to create today?
Well, today, I read a mix of indie comics and manga comics. I especially love biographies and autobiographies. So reading about other people's lives, learning about other people's lives, I find it fascinating. It helps me understand people better. I mean, I do like a lot of fiction too, but it's autobiographies in general that tend to seem to move me the most, and learning about other people's experiences.
Very good. And speaking of people's experiences, today we're talking about your latest graphic memoir, The Big Soup, Growing Up Autistic. What if you could tell me, what is the book all about?
Yeah, so this book explores my life from birth to around nowadays, the different stages in development, the situation my parents were in. I had I have a Danish dad and a Canadian mother, and they eventually moved to the UK where I was born. I was then diagnosed with autism, or back then just Asperger's syndrome specifically, which is now known by the DSM-5 as level 1 autism, but it depends who you ask, really. Yeah, so it's about going for the education system, going to special needs class, and then being able to be put into mainstream class later on, but then having to go back into more specialized boarding school and so on. Just all these different things, the people I met along the way, the staff I met and communicated with, the lessons I learned and the challenges I faced and the challenges my peers faced too. So just trying to explore that as best as I could.
Why did you want to make this graphic memoir?
I wanted to share a certain point of view. With the autistic experience, it does vary from person to person quite a bit. So I was thinking, well, this could be one of many experiences out there. You could just have that on a shelf in the library, one to choose from of many. I'd be very happy to see multiple autism biographies or autobiographies available for people to look at and say, oh, they could read like a different range of them and get a better view about autism in general. But you wouldn't necessarily get the full picture from just one life story.
Right. So you're hoping that it's an educational resource for both people with autism and parents who have children who are autistic?
Yeah, I think so. It's like people who have children or peers or they themselves are autistic. It's kind of like for those with, for the autistic people, it's like, oh, I can relate to some of this, it's a kindred spirit thing, or this is how it differs. And then for people who know autistic people, it can help. I noticed that about them, and this might be how they function and how they think. Maybe it'll give them some more clues towards that.
This book, The Big Soup, is published by Cloudscape Comics through Kickstarter. Can you talk a little bit about the experience working with Cloudscape Comics?
I've had a really good experience because my editor, Kelly Chen, is a fantastic editor. Very patient, very open-minded, very accommodating. She didn't really interfere with the story at all. She was like, no, this is your story. This is how you should, you should just tell it the way you want to tell it. I mean, she gave me lots of advice and say, oh, this makes more sense flowing this way and so on, the usual things. And I really appreciate that. It's been very helpful. It hasn't been a lot of interference from my personal experience here.
I want to switch gears a wee bit and talk about the creative process. Can you talk about the tools used to create The Big Soup?
I would write up the script, and then the script would need to be abridged heavily. I just wanted to get everything down in one document. So it ended up being like 3 times as long as it needed to be. But then it was doubling as a sort of like a therapeutic experience. I was able to like record my life and say, okay, I have a record of this now. And then I can kind of like chop it up, convert it into a narrative more pleasing for a reader and more bridged for a reader and better suited for adapting to a comic. And then, a lot of people are given a page number and they have to make a set page count, say, oh, I have 200 pages. It has to be 200 pages. But I was given more leeway and I was able to say, well, maybe I want some more pages than that. So we ended up with about 330 or so pages, which is really good for me because I like having longer comics. I like being able to take the time to tell more details. We wrote up all the script and then I started roughing out the pages. I said, okay, I have like an estimate 70 pages for this chapter, 30 pages for this chapter. We're trying to achieve that. So I put all the pencils in on the computer using Clip Studio Paint. I was using an old Wacom tablet, however you pronounce that, and it just broke halfway through the project, so I had to buy a new one, which is a much better XP pen tablet. So that was nice. But after I do the pencils, I check it out with the editor. We get feedback. I do the inking, and then I'll just do some basic shading because it's the whole comic's in blue and white.
And you are a fan of the digital aspect rather than traditional?
Yeah, it's a bit of a mixed thing here because, especially with the rise of AI, I think traditional physical art is going to have. We don't know really until it happens, but I think physical traditional art is going to have even more importance because it's like you have something there if you want to try and sell it to people. But in the end, when people are reading a book or have a PDF of it, it's going to be on a screen. So that doesn't necessarily differentiate so much. It's more like if you take it to galleries and exhibitions or you want to sell the original artwork, that's more what I'm thinking. But when it comes to like, oh, I'm reading a book about this, I have the whole comic here on my ebook reader or print it off the shelf. It's like, well, in the end, it can end up looking very similar. So I'm not so worried about that as much. And I think it's a lot easier for me to use digital artwork because I can make these edits, I can make these changes. It's a lot less strain on my hand because I can zoom in a lot. And because whenever I'm doing fine details, I end up with quite nasty hand cramps if I'm doing it traditionally. But when I'm doing it digitally, it's like, oh yeah, it's fine.
I mentioned that this book is available through Kickstarter. Can you talk about some of the incentives that are being offered for The Big Soup?
We first have, we had the base book, of course, and then we can have that as an ebook or as a physical copy. There's a couple of packs here. We have the More Servings pack. It includes 2 anthologies that I was featured in, 2 Cloudscape anthologies. I have a story in each of those, as well as a bonus ebook called More Soup, which will have mini comics that I made leading up to this project, as well as some deleted scenes and some behind the scenes. So that'll be fun to share later on. There's also another tier called Superstock for 80 Canadian dollars. And Superstock has a nice little goodie bag with 3 landscape prints that I've done based on panels from the comic, a sticker sheet of ducks. These ducks have like different autism traits. So we have info dumping and sensory overload, a keyring of the same duck, a bookmark. So we have all that in a nice little bundle. You get all those little bonus things if you buy that bundle. Then There's other ones too. I'm offering digital commissions. There's a retail tier where you get multiple copies for a lower price. And then Cloudscape's offering their own mega libraries too on top of that. So, we got a lot of options here.
Sounds like it. Yeah, lots of good stuff going on. So we've been talking about the big soup. I'm wondering if you could give us a hint about what's the next thing that you're working on.
I've been wanting to work on some fiction for a while because it's a bit harder for me to work on fiction. Well, no, I've been working on fiction a long time in my life. It's more like it's a different kind of challenge. With biographies, it's like, this is it. This is the fact. Let's tell the story. But with fiction, I think people can be rightly so a lot more critical about it because it's like, well, you can't choose necessarily what happens in your life, but you can choose how to tell it. But with fiction, it's like, did this have to happen? This doesn't seem very believable, or stuff like that. So I had a story about these two time travelers, which is a bit simplified, but I haven't really come up with an elevator pitch yet. Currently, my elevator pitch is you push the emergency button and you hold the person hostage for like 20 minutes and then you info dump the story. So that's the main thing, is trying to work on an elevator pitch for it so I can explain it faster. But it would be about these people going to different time zones and stealing things, kind of like Time Bandit style in theory. I really love that because I love exploring history, exploring different cultures, and being able to tell stories about that.
Typically with books, you want to do promotion. So I've got to ask you, do you have any events planned for this year to promote the Big Soup?
We'll be at Rain City Comic Con on April 19th. That's in Vancouver. I mean, all these are going to be in Vancouver. We'll be at Mini-Comi this year, and then we'll be at the Halloween markets like Nightmare Before Christmas market and so on. I'll post more information about that on my Instagram just in case things change.
And speaking of that, where can people find you online to find out more about your current and your future plans?
I think the best place for that would be Instagram. So that would be Nuclear Jackal, and that's all just one word. And that's where I post updates, illustrations, art, and so on, as well as like my next conventions.
Thanks to Matthew for the chat. You can discover more about Matthew J.R. Nielsen online at nuclearjackal.com and on Instagram at nuclearjackal. You can discover more about the Big Soup Growing Up Autistic on Kickstarter. And thank you for tuning in to the True North Country Comics podcast. I invite you to visit the True North Country Comics website to listen to even more conversations with creators about making comic books and graphic novels. I also encourage you to subscribe via the website so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can follow along True North Country Comics on most social media platforms, and you're encouraged to send any and all feedback to John at truenorthcountrycomics.com. Thanks for tuning in, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2026.